Hello everyone, and welcome to the third in our series of TI Talks. Please take your seats if you'd like to listen. We've got a few spaces here at the front. So the TI Talks are taking place here on the Tagleaf Industries stand every day during Interpack at 3 o'clock, and please check out the program and come along in the next few days as well. I'm Tim Sykes, I'm Brand Director at Packaging Europe, and it's my honour to moderate today's session. Before we get going, I just wanted to give you a few practical notes. First of all, we'll have time for questions and answers at the end, so do interact with our panellists if you have any questions you want to follow up on. Secondly, there will be a networking session afterwards, so feel free to stay at the stand and you can informally talk to the speakers and any of the experts from Tagleaf who are here. And while you're at the stand, I recommend checking out some of the various parts of this booth. In the far corner, you can see some exercise bikes where you can see if you can get to the top of the leaderboard. My place at the top was very brief, and I'm now way down on the leaderboard. But there's a serious side to this as well, that for every kilometre that we cycle, Tagleaf will be donating to the victims of the recent Turkish earthquakes. So do your bit there. Also, behind you, there's the redesign section of the stand where you can see some of the really impressive collaboration projects between Tagleaf and partners on circular design. So, without further ado, today's discussion is, I think, a really fascinating one because we have an opportunity to bring together European and North American perspectives on circularity in plastics. And hopefully, in doing so, we get some insights about how we can learn from each other, how can we collaborate more effectively as well, and build a global circular economy faster. Our two speakers today are Fabrizio Di Gregorio. He has a background in academia and 2 years as R&D manager at CONAI, which is the Italian APR scheme. And he's currently technical director at Plastic Recylers Europe and head of Recyclass. Welcome, Fabrizio.
Thank you, Tim.
And secondly, we have basically his equivalent, the technical director at the Association of Plastics Recyclers, really the North American version of PRE, Scott Trenor. Welcome. Scott has 20 years of experience in the plastic industry, working in R&D, commercialization, acquisition and strategy roles, most recently at Milken. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you.
So maybe it would be useful for the audience if you were just to very briefly introduce yourselves and the roles of your respective organizations. Let's start with Fabrizio.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, a big thank you to the Tagleaf industry team to give us this opportunity. I'm the technical director of Plastic Recyclers Europe. Plastic Recyclers Europe is the official European Association of Plastic Recyclers. We represent around 80% of the plastic recycling capacity all across Europe. And I'm also the head of Recyclass, that is a value chain initiative counting roughly 90 brand owners, retailers, raw material producers, and converters. And Tagleaf Industries is one of our members. And together with Recyclers, we are building up a value chain collaboration with a scientific approach in order to define design for recycling criteria, scientific based, and we are looking, of course, with these initiatives to support the circularity journey for plastics in Europe.
Thank you. Same question to Scott.
I think he answered it mostly for me. So the Association of Plastics Recyclers is the only trade association in North America focused only on recycling. So our core memberships are the reclaimers and recyclers. And then we have, it's about 370 members now that span the entire value chain in recycling. Much like Recyclass, we have design for recycling guidelines, we have testing protocols, and then recognition programs for companies like Tagleaf that are trying to do responsible or new innovations into the recycling field.
Thank you both. So I'd like to start by asking you how we can characterize the circular economy and recycling landscape across the two continents. Maybe we can tease out some of the commonalities and contrasts between them. Scott, maybe I could ask you to start first.
Yeah, so this could be a very long discussion if we want, but I think if we start with commonalities, and we'll dig into this more later, I think essentially if you look at rigid PET, rigid polypropylene, rigid HD, and PE films, that's about 80% of the packaging in the market. And the formats are pretty similar between here and Europe, right? They're obviously larger containers in the US. We like our gallon milk jugs, right? When you don't drink milk out of jugs here. But that part of the process, and we'll talk more about it, and the harmonization part is relatively similar. Where the bigger differences are is in collection in the US, right? So we're much more decentralized. They're on the order of, I think, 9,000 different recycling programs in North America, and they all have different collection systems. They all collect different types of materials, and it's really makes it difficult for MRFs and others to scale technologies.
In Europe, as you know, the situation is quite challenging because we have on the table a proposal for repackaging packaging waste regulation that is quite ambitious because from January the 1st, 2030, all packaging on the market should be recyclable and the recyclability assessment should be defined on scientific-based criteria. So Recyclass is willing to contribute to the definition of these criteria. And at the same time, to really get the circularity for plastics, in Europe we have this proposal to have mandatory recycled plastics in whatever plastic packaging on the market. So, as Scott said, when we talk about packaging, and in particular plastic packaging, the structures looks like very similar each other, in particular for rigids, PET, HDP, PP, but also for flexibles, where a lot of multi-layers, multi-materials are still on the market. But what is probably the main difference is that in Europe now the legislator is really shifting the paradigm from the linear economy to the circular economy. And the only way to move to a circular economy is to keep the value in the waste, to have then the ability to recycle these waste in a new resource that can diminish the dependency of virgin in the same sector. So the goal is really to go packaging to packaging, and probably this is the main difference today between US and Europe when it comes to recyclability.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we just don't have the government push across the entire US, right? So California, Oregon, Washington, Northeast United States, they're getting to where Europe was probably 15 years ago. So we have a lot to learn from the regulatory push that you're getting here.
So, quite different in some key aspects. I'd like to explore the idea of harmonization between the two continents. To what extent, first of all, do you think it would be of benefit to both continents and globally to have a more harmonized system closer? We haven't even talked actually about the recycling guidelines and understanding of what's recyclable, but could you talk a bit about how much harmonization we have at the moment and how much we need?
Yes, let's start from Europe. In Europe, as probably everyone knows very well, the situation is quite well fragmented, where in each country we have different design for recycling criteria. And this is because the criteria are opinion-based. So this structure for me is recyclable, for me is not. So the same packaging is classified as recyclable in Germany and not recyclable in Spain. Of course, this is not a scientific-based approach, and this will never contribute to the harmonization. But we are now in a phase where we are going in Europe to standardize the design for recycling criteria. And what I discussed a lot of times also with Scott, the market is a global market. Okay, in Europe we are moving faster because the legislator, we have an extra push. But at the end of the day, the players are global players. So in order to support the global players, we need, in any case, to harmonize the vision, standardize the testing protocols and the design for recycling criteria as much as we can. So we can copy-paste each other, but we can share data and direct experience in order to accelerate, to give a boost to the definition and the standardization of such a criteria.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a global brand, you don't want to be making different packaging selections for various individual countries, or you want a global package that you can ship easily anywhere, right? So getting to similar guidelines for recyclability, similar package designs really enables brands to simplify their supply chain.
Great. So collaboration and closer harmonization is clearly something that we should all be working for. Let's think about what are the ways that we can do that, and what are the barriers to doing so. First of all, when it comes to institutional and cultural factors, how do you see that, Fabrizio?
Yeah, first of all, probably could be very good to announce also today that in February, APR, the Association of Plastic Recyclers in US, and Recyclass from Plastic Recyclers Europe has signed an official collaboration agreement in order to align as much as we can the design for recycling guidelines, the testing protocols, and the methodology behind the recyclability assessment by February 2024. So in 1 year, and we are really working together, the two teams. Also, APR colleagues are invited to join the technical committees in Recyclass, and Recyclass team is invited to join the APR technical committees in order to further share data and experience each other and give an extra boost to the harmonization. In terms of different cultural differences, yes, I think the main driver today is really coming in Europe from the legislator. Historically, we have probably a different way to collect material. We have a lot of EPR schemes quite well established at national levels that I've collected and addressed to recycling plastic packaging, most of the plastic packaging, so they have a broad experience. But the shift in the paradigm in Europe is really now the legislation, because the only way to really change the way we manage plastic, and in particular plastic waste, is to rethink the design of the plastic products, the plastic packaging, in order to facilitate the sorting and recycling operation and to keep the material back to the market. So we need to engage every single player in the industry, and this industry is quite big, but at the same time we need to engage the consumers, because everything starts with the design, and Tag Leaf industry is really supporting on that, but then citizens need to be really committed to facilitate the collection and then the sortability and recyclability of the material in the market.
Yeah, I think it's really easy for us to align because we have the same goal at the end of the day, right? We want to ensure that every piece of plastic packaging that enters the market is feedstock for another plastic packaging at its end of life, right? So, we've been working pretty much in parallel paths and have very similar projects going on. One example I'll give is laminating adhesives for flexible films. Jean-Emile and the Recyclass team presented to our flexible team so that we can actually take the project that we had scoped out and use what Recyclass has learned to fill in some gaps and then understand different parts of the aspects of the recycling system that maybe be a little more U.S. focused, so they weren't part of the Recyclass original work. But I think again the collaboration there has been great. We've been working very well together. We sit on each other's technical meetings, and just trying to get to an endpoint faster is really what we're trying to work for. And if we were kind of talking before this, right? If U.S. and Europe can't harmonize our packaging because we're all not that different, spreading that out to the rest of the world is going to be much more complex.
Could you give us some insights into on a more detailed level, the challenges, or how challenging, how simple it is to align around recycling protocols? It's great that you're in this process and dialogue, but are there any particular areas that you see that historically that you're coming from very different directions?
Yeah, I don't know that we're coming from that different of a direction, right? It's a global economy. Much of the recycling infrastructure and equipment is made here in Europe and shipped to the U.S. So the unit operations are very similar. there are differences in maybe wash temperatures or how we treat a recycle stream. Maybe in one case in the APRs, if I think about films, right, we run our films through a single screw extruder, you do a twin screw. At the end of the day, does that difference matter? I don't know. That's the type of work that we need to plan to test to ensure that subtle differences like that don't really, they may or may not be relevant.
I would also add that we're not so much different, not only because in front of you today you have two technical guys, so trying to really say to the whole industry, hey guys, we need to have this scientific-based approach because whatever opinion you have, it doesn't matter today, at least for me and Scott, then probably also for the legislator. But we have started in APR and PRE from common background, scientific-based approach, meaning that we need to standardize the testing procedures and then to define the design for recycling criteria in the guidelines on the basis of the data and the knowledge. And this knowledge must be shared all across the value chain, because if one company will completely redesign their packaging, it will be not enough. We need to all together to understand that we need to redesign our business model in the industry to get the goal of the circular economy that the Commission is looking to put in place by 2030 in Europe. So starting with common background and scientific-based technical approach is really, for us, a facilitator. And we are supported by our teams and so other technical guys that have a lot of knowledge. And we are supported by our members, APR members and Recylers members. We have common members that are really pushing for having this extra harmonization between Europe and US. And I see this as really an extra way to facilitate the work.
And I think it's probably dangerous when the technical person starts talking about economics, right? But design for recycling and having simpler packaging that's easier to recycle improves the economics throughout the entire supply chain. And that's really what we need to do, especially in the US where we might have tipping fees as low as $20 a ton. It's really hard to do anything innovative for $20 a ton. So getting the economies of scale up and bringing down processing costs, I think, is part of the key to the circular economy that we're also obviously focused on.
I'd like to ask you what role you see for disruptive technologies in supporting the growth of a circular economy in plastics, and also whether your organizations have a role in trying to promote those as part or an extension of the recycling protocols. For example, here in Europe we have the Holy Grail 2.0 digital watermarking project, which seems as though it may add a great deal of value to the yields of recycling.
Technologies is something we need. Innovation in technology is something we need for sure, but we need also to be realistic. There is no one silver bullet. The plastic industry is a very complex industry because plastic is a fantastic material that has been shaped in a multitude of formulations. So now, to put all this formulation in a recycling process and obtain a valuable recycled plastics to reduce, as I said at the beginning of this speech, the dependency of virgin material in packaging again is very hard to do. So I would focus in any case once again on the design, because whatever will be the feedstock, so the packaging waste streams we will go to manage in 2030, there will be too much heterogeneity to have one unique technology able to convert this material in the recycled plastics we will desire. This is the first. Second, the collection. In Europe we have a good historical household collection in the different countries, but this is not enough. Just to give an example, when we talk about flexible films, and today we are hosted by someone trying to push the recyclability of polypropylene flexible films. Polypropylene flexible films are still today in Europe not collected in many countries. Also polyethylene films are often not collected because it's economically probably unviable, and it's an extra effort for the APRs. But by 2025, all single piece of packaging in Europe must be collected. Then, as you said, when it comes to sorting and recycling technologies, yes, innovation are coming. In sorting, we have the digital watermarking, for example, so the Oliger Project 2.0 you cited, that can for example, facilitate by sorting food versus non-food. And then we have artificial intelligence. That for me, it's really something we can talk about today because we really probably don't know what we're talking about. It could be so much disruptive technology in our industry, in all the industry, that could really change the paradigm. When it comes to recycling, I know that the point is mechanical recycling versus chemical recycling. Chemical recycling is a valuable process if well defined and identified for a specific packaging stream. From my personal experience in chemical recycling, when I got my PhD thesis in chemical recycling 15 years ago, for polyolefin, it's really difficult to achieve because pyrolysis yield and efficiency are very, very limited. And in any case, for any process that is based on reactions, you need to have a very homogeneous and stable feedstock material, and we're talking about waste, so the most heterogeneous feedstock we have in the world. So thinking about the future in recycling, I see some place for chemical recycling to contribute to the circular economy for plastics, but mainly for PET and polystyrene than for polyolefin. This is my personal view.
Yeah, I think nothing excites technologists like new technologies, right? But I think what we need to do, and when we look at our guidelines, is that the technologies have to be compatible with the recycling stream. So yes, we want disruptive technologies that improve packaging, but we don't want them at the cost of recyclability. Chemical recycling, I think, it's an interesting field. There's lots of room for improvement, I would say. And it's at the end of the day, it's going to be a combination of multiple approaches to get to the higher circularity rates that we need to be at, and not continuing to landfill and incinerate materials.
Thank you. So I think, in general, you've told a story that's quite encouraging regarding your own collaboration, the potential for harmonization between the European and North American circular economies. Where do you see the biggest barriers when we think about all of the stakeholders who need to align around a circular economy? Where are the disconnects, and where would you like to see a better collaboration?
Sure. I think our members many of them are global, right? And they've been asking us to do this for a long time because it simplifies their process. So what are the hold-up points? Well, there are differences in our protocols. We need to understand which ones are relevant, which ones are not. Since we're both science-based, we need to do the testing to understand what that is, and the testing is going to be expensive. So there's going to be an economic barrier, I think, that will look to both of our members to help support in getting to a point where they're not necessarily doing two different protocols for North America, one for Europe. They can do the same protocols, save some money ideally, and get to the right answer for a package that could be used globally.
In the 4 years we experienced with Recyclass, we got huge support from the members. Because even though we founded several test campaigns in order to further generate data and share this knowledge with the value chain, our members has also started from the beginning to test themselves their own structure with our testing protocol. So they have generated data in any case. And with this official collaboration with APR, so we are looking to share this knowledge, this data, in order to facilitate the harmonization. As Scott said, we should also point out today that we will never harmonize US and Europe 100% because from a legislative point of view, we have different pressures, in particular thinking about environmental burdens. And when it comes to the technologies, even though the technologies in terms of sorting and recycling are pretty similar, but there are parameters that could be different to align from an industrial point of view. So we need to keep in consideration along the harmonization the difference in parameters and variables we have, as well as the difference in the ultimate quality of recycled plastics we would like to see on the market to get a stamp and approval about the compatibility with design, with the recycling about this packaging. Where in Europe, the focus is really film to film, bottle to bottle. That's it. Because we cannot go longer in from film to other application. Because if by 2030 we need to have mandatory recycled plastics in films, food product films, contact-sensitive rigid packaging, and so on, we need to generate these recycled plastics today, not tomorrow, because tomorrow will be too late, and the consequences will be huge. So I really look forward to have more contribution from my colleague Scott and his team, because only working strictly together, US and Europe, we can achieve that.
And thinking more about external stakeholders, including regulators, are there areas where you feel you need more help from outside of the value chain?
Well, I think getting some of the regulatory pressures, maybe slightly different pressures that Fabrizio is in the entire industry getting here in Europe into the United States, I think would be helpful to push the industry. So California is moving quite aggressively. They actually have regulated in our design guidelines into their state design for recyclability assessment. So we're getting a bit of a push, not quite as strong from some of the other states, though.
The Commission is looking to change the way we live in Europe. So it's not a matter of packaging waste regulation or plastic. It's a matter of how we as citizens live in this continent. So the packaging waste regulation is part of the Green Deal. So there is a vision behind that. So there are many files on the table, not only the packaging waste regulations, and we need to live with that. The only way to engage the legislator is to be able to share the reality by having in our hands enough reliable data to share. So we need to anticipate the legislator, and this is exactly what APR and Recyclass are doing from years, in order to contribute to the discussion in a technical way and ensure that what is the vision of the Commission will not generate further burdens for the environment, but will move our society in a more circular and sustainable society.
And thinking about regulation, one thing I would observe watching global packaging and environmental discourse over the last 5 years or so is that there's been a shift in emphasis from a very, very fierce focus on plastic waste, ocean plastics, etc., to climate now becoming much more central to all of our discussion about sustainability. Do you see that impacting the work that you're doing? And do you have to think about carbon in circularity more than you were when you were at the outset of this project?
You're completely right. The discussion is not, as I said a few minutes before, about plastic. The discussion is really about the way we live in this continent, or the way we live on this planet. So as soon as come to recycling or recyclability, and in particular for plastic recyclability, the carbon neutrality or the CO2 emissions are part of the discussion. And there was a study by the Joint Research Center a couple of years ago that quite well defined it and assessed all the benefits coming from recycling. When you have a material used in the society, in any case, you cannot compare a scenario with a scenario that does not exist. So in any case, you need to compare a scenario with the other's potential scenario. And this is probably the most important we need to facilitate in the discussion with the legislator. But I can underline that the European Commission, the European Parliament are fully aware that plastics is a material we need. No one is trying to put plastics out of the market. What the legislator is trying to do in Europe is to ensure that the plastics waste will be treated in a proper way and will be reduced in a circular pathway in the society in order to reduce the environmental burdens, the carbon footprint, for example.
Yeah, and even without the regulations in North America, you can see how finance and banks are also putting money into the circular economy. I think something like 75% of global GDP has some sort of net zero goal at this point. And the easiest way, or one of the easiest ways to get there, and they're published reports by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, is recycling not just plastics, but all materials, right? So we published an LCA about 2 years ago that did a cradle-to-gate analysis of recycling of polypropylene, polyethylene, and PET. Carbon footprint of recycled polypropylene is on the order of 80 to 90% lower than virgin. Polyethylene is about the same. PET is a little lower, or not quite as good, but solid stating, and it's a little bit more washing. But I mean, those are significant reductions in carbon footprint. And then it's not just the circularity discussion, right? So we start talking about plastics and other applications like textiles, where the textile and apparel companies have carbon footprint reductions too, and using rPET fiber is equally significant in reducing the carbon footprints of textiles. I guess the next harmonization is try to figure out how to recycle textiles, right? Is that the next one after packaging?
Thank you very much. Actually, in our discussion that we had just before we began, Fabrizio, you mentioned it would be great if we had someone from China here as well, sitting and sharing their perspectives. How do you see the global progress on recycling protocols and circular economy? And if you had your Chinese counterpart sitting with you today, what would you like to hear from them?
All the information I have. That's it. And I think Scott will say exactly the same. All the information we have can be used by whatever other counterpart we have all across the world in order to boost the transition from a linear economy to a circular economy for plastic.
Yeah, and I think there's some social aspects to this too, right? So we need to elevate developing countries to a point where they're not searching for their next meal, but understand, which if you are, you really don't care about recycling quite as much. But to get them to a point that the waste infrastructure is there to handle recycle streams, and if they're starting with a clean slate, it's a bit easier to not build in hindrances. And recycling, trade of recycled materials is a global industry, right? It's a global supply chain. North America, the fiber, textile industry imported a record amount of rPET last year because we're putting more PET into bottles and we're not collecting enough in North America.
If I can add very shortly, many countries have trying to contact Recyclass in the last year to replicate Recyclass in their own country. Of course, we can share experience, we can share technical data with these countries, but recyclability starts with design. But if you do not have a proper collection system in place, if you do not have sorting and recycling capacity installed, you will never recycle one single piece of packaging. So, yeah, we can communicate, we can learn each other, we can educate the other, we can share as much as we can, but then we need a really global movement to make it.
Thank you very much. I think that's a great point to end the main part of the discussion. But we have an opportunity now to turn to our audience. Would anyone like to put any questions to our speakers today? If you raise your hand, we can bring... Oh, sorry, I was looking in the wrong direction.
I didn't want to.
I'm right, just here in the front.
Thank you. I come from Greece, and I would like to ask you if I have written down. Is the information available for manufacturers or traders or consumers about the collectors? Where are they? And which materials are recyclable? Because sometimes people, consumers or companies, do not know if their products or if the products they are using are recyclable, and when they can put them in order to be well managed.
Yeah, I think
A platform, for example, that contains the country, the material, and the points of collection would be really well and good in order to have all the information. A suggestion if there is no already.
Thank you for the question. I think it's a very worth point because, as I said, still in Europe today, not all the packaging are collected.
Yes.
So this is a shame. We're talking about circularity, but there is no collection of flexible in UK, for example. Or if you think about all the East country in Europe, as you know, there are still many difficulties to put collection in place because economics is really expensive. Then, okay, it's also part of education for citizens. On your question, there is no, at my best knowledge, there is no one platform where all this information are publicly available. With Recyclass, what we tried to do from a couple of years ago, it was exactly to collect as much as we can official information from local authorities and APR schemes about the local collections, the local capacity of sorting and recycling infrastructure. So at the end of the Recyclass tool, there is a map of Europe with all the countries in green, yellow, or red, depending by the amount of collection per packaging, sorting of collection, sorting per packaging, and recycling per packaging. We would like to see, of course, an evolution about this map. So we would like to ensure that this map will become completely green as soon as we can. But I should say that we are still far away from that because, and this is the point, probably an important point. Without an extra push in Europe from the legislator, we will never obtain 100% collection. So now we have this mandatory collection for all packaging by 2025. So I see that all the EPRs are moving faster to put collection system in place also for such an articles like the PP flexibles, for example, or the PT trays or the polystyrene cups that until yesterday were completely discarded in the residues waste, just because today they need to prove that they are moving in the right direction, because without collection there is no recycling.
Yes.
So from our side we will try to facilitate as much as we can. Hopefully someone will decide to officially publish data, but these are very sensitive data.
Okay, thank you.
I don't, Scott, are there any equivalent discussions in the US?
Yeah, so there's a nonprofit called the Recycling Partnership, and they're collecting essentially the same data. So they have a chat bot on their website that you can put in your zip code, and it will tell you whether a certain maybe type of material, bottle, jugs, whatever, are recycled in that area. But it's a complex map. But the part of the state of South Carolina that I live in has about 2 million people, and there are at least 30 different recycling programs.
I think in general the complexity of accessing that data is a reflection of the fragmentation of the ecosystem that we're talking about. Any other questions? Yeah, one here.
Hi, my name is Tanja Radus and I'm from Norner, coming from Norway. So I have a question in relation to the gap that we have because we don't have infrastructure for sorting from non-food to food contact materials. How do you see that this gap is going to be closed anytime soon, considering that we have two regulations that are pushing towards it? And we know that 40% of all packaging is actually food packaging. So what we're going to face is a disbalance or discrepancy on the market of the recycled materials, because as of today, we cannot use recycled materials in food contact except in the case of functional barriers if it's approved. So I'm just interested in how this is going. This is a very complicated topic, but I'm very interested in your opinion.
Thank you for the question, and I would like to give you an answer, but I do not have the crystal ball, and what I can share with you and our colleagues today, it's my personal opinion. I think at the end of the day that this is probably one of the main goal we can achieve in a few years with innovative sorting technologies like the digital watermarking or the artificial intelligence. We can really separate food from non-food in a proper and economic way. As I said, digital watermarking probably we know very well. It's now the project Holy Grail is 2.0 is very well known. There are a lot of information, and the tests are now at industrial scale. But when it comes to artificial intelligence, really, I think no one today in this audience is aware about what the artificial intelligence can do. Also, when we talk about plastic recycling. So I really think this is an easy one to do, that in any case is a must to do, because by 2030, as you said, in every single piece of packaging we are going to put on the single market in Europe, contact-sensitive food contact polyolefin, we need to put recycled plastic inside. So this is today a missing piece of the puzzle, but it's an important missing piece of the puzzle. The alternative, of course, is to go for chemical recycling, whatever technology, and then to say, okay, it was recycled chemically, so it's good for food contact application. But today, in Europe, we do not have one line chemical recycling, and in particular, the discussion about how to put the chemical recycling processes and technologies that can be very different each other in the legal framework is still under debate. But it will come as well, I think, in 1 year. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
From a North American perspective, and this is one area where maybe we're a little ahead of Europe, is that the Food and Drug Administration does have a process for polyolefins to achieve food contact. It's mostly around source segregation, which is what something the Holy Grail is going to, but it's done via either manual sortation or with robotics now. So if you get above a certain percentage of food contact going into your process, there's some other hurdles about decontamination that you need to prove also, but you can get a letter of non-objection for the food from the FDA.
And we have a question over there.
Yes, Patrick Desias from Taglif. I'm interested in the efficiency of chemical recycling. My understanding is it's in the low 20s. And my concern is that if it remains at that level, it will not be a project for future. Do we have like perspective that these low 20s could go up to 40, 50? So what is your technical view?
So it's going to be a little more, I'll answer that in a different way, and it's going to be process dependent. So depolymerization for PET does have much higher efficiencies than pyrolysis and gasification. I think over the last, 5 months, there's been probably about a half dozen publications in the academic literature on this, and the numbers range from, I think I've seen from bale to ethylene as low as 12% and as high as 35 to 40%. It's very difficult to be circular more than once if you have a 12% efficiency. That said, we've been making polyethylene and polypropylene for 60 some years now. We've been trying to unmake these materials for 15 years, right? So I think there's probably a lot of space for innovation, but if we're not collecting enough materials to put into these high volume processes, there's very little drive to do much more innovation or invest in this space, I would say.
If I can, from my direct perspective, I've been working 10 years in academics in Italy, but I enjoyed to share experience with US, Korean, for companies for several years on pyrolysis and gasification, managing pilot plants. And my professor was trying to convert plastic waste and any other kind of waste in valuable material already 40 years before. So when we talk about chemical recycling, we should be conscious that we are not talking about innovative technologies. We should be conscious that we are not talking about one technology, and we should be conscious that we are not talking about one process. So chemical recycling is a nice word to define a plethora of technologies, and for each of these you have processes, and for each of these you have the feedstock. As Scott said very well, we should also differentiate between polyethylene terephthalate and polyolefin, because then the process can be completely different, as well as the technical feasibility and economic viability of the process. So in my personal opinion, to go short to the point, if we talk about pyrolysis, that's the main discussion today, there is no way you cannot imagine to put the waste, all the waste we are collecting today in a reactor, and then to see outside, coming outside from the reactor, the recycled plastics you would like to use in packaging again. It's a super complex process, because the first you need to resort the sorted material in order to have a stable feedstock, as much as you can stable. Also, you need to decontaminate from substances like PVC, for example. Then you need to stabilize as much as you can the reactions in your reactor, because you cannot predict yourself the reactions, because the reaction will depend by the parameters, by the process, of course, but by the feedstock. So it's the feedstock that will decide what is the primary reaction, what is the secondary reaction. And when I'm talking about reaction, because it's becoming, I know, a little bit complex, but I'm talking about products. From each reaction, you have a product. So if you are looking to have oil, and you have a very pure oil, probably you should go straight for one single reaction. Unfortunately, from pyrolysis, you have char, oil, and gas. Gas and char you cannot convert in plastic, so the oil should be then cleaned extensively. And this is the reason why we do not have pyrolysis plant in Europe. Because the technology is quite old. 40, 50 years ago, Professor Kaminski in Germany started to study pyrolysis for plastic waste. And the economic feasibility is not there, and also the final yields of the process for polyolefin are very limited. If you go to check in the scientific journals, everyone say, okay, 20%, 30%, and in any case, you need to put the oil in a cracker, diluted with the naphtha. So it's a very complicated question. But just to say that this is not the silver bullets. So we need to work today, not tomorrow. We cannot delay further, in particular in Europe. I would say all around the world, but in Europe there is no time to waste.
We have a question at the front. Oh, sorry, Karl-Heinz.
Sorry. I don't want to talk about chemical recycling, Fabrizio, but I have a question to Scott still on this letter of compliance for food applications. How do you think about the European situation? Because here you have this European NIAS situation, NIAS regulation, which requires you more or less for an assessment of every contamination is above 10 parts per billion. And I could imagine that is very challenging from my side when you have to take into consideration degradation products of polymers and of food contaminations that you have in the mechanical recycled flexible packaging material.
Yeah, I'm probably not the best person to speak to European regulations on NIAS, but it's the process in the U.S. does take into account degradation. It takes into account it's a challenge test, so there are 7 different chemicals, polar or non-polar, that you have to show higher than 99% removal of those materials. So they do at least take into account some screening of your technology's ability to remove contamination.
Okay, but the 10 parts per billion thing you don't have now?
No.
That's a problem, I think.
Yeah. Scott.
Yes.
So I'm from the U.S., and I've worked in flexible packaging for a number of years. Given that rigid plastic water bottles, polyester, have been out there for recycling, since the late 70s? And I just heard you say that you're importing polyester to put back into recycling, although we have enough water bottles in the U.S. that aren't getting recycled, right? What is the success rate of the storefront drop-off for films? Because I'm excited to help the planet. I'm scared about the ability of people putting the action into the words.
Yeah, and so I don't know the number for store drop-off off the top of my head. It's lower than our home drop-off recycling rates, right? And there are other studies that show that if you use a plastic package in your bathroom versus your kitchen, the one in the kitchen has a higher recyclability, is recycled at a higher rate than the one in the bathroom, because your recycle bin's probably in your kitchen, not in your bathroom. So there are a lot of social and consumer behaviors that need to be changed and augmented. And the reason we have store take back for films and we don't have curbside is because of single stream collection in North America, right? And the plastic packaging gets into the paper stream, which is 70% by weight of what goes into the into a MRF, and they don't want that. So the technologies are there to separate out fiber from plastic, from flexible packaging, but there's not the economics to do that. As you mentioned earlier, for flexible packaging, the economics just aren't currently there for recycling them.
Are there any plans to get just even consumer knowledge? I'm not sure how many people even know about storefront drop-off, right? I mean, I do, and I do it wholeheartedly. Like, I have little collection bags of high-density bags and, whatever I can throughout different parts of my house. Right?
Yeah, so the Recycling Partnership is focused on that area of consumer education and understanding what drives the consumer to recycle or not to. So they have a Center for Behavioral Science and Innovation, I think it's called, that are running pilots in people's houses and seeing what's the most efficient way of recycling in terms of how people handle the recyclables and their waste at the same time.
Yeah, thanks. I'm just a little concerned because there are, you can put a deposit down on cans and bottles in some states, and I'm not sure if that'll drive a consumer to do that.
Well, it definitely drives recycling rates. So states that have deposit systems for PET, their recovery rates are above 70% versus the U.S. average, which is less than 30, right? So that definitely drives... the economics drive collection, because that piece of used plastic packaging has value to the user, right? And then there are some pilots in North America around separating out flexible packaging from fiber. So there was the MRFF, Material Recovery for the Future, outside of Philadelphia, that studied that. Waste Management and I believe Dow have a pilot in outside of Chicago, where they're putting in the infrastructure to do that. So it may be coming, but it's about the economics.
Thanks.
So, any more questions? I think not. Well, thank you, everyone. That's the most engaged audience we've had so far in this series of TI Talks. And I think that reflects well on the expertise and the fascinating discussion that we had. So I'd like everyone to thank Scott Trenor and Fabrizio Di Gregorio. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Tim, and thank you, TI, for having us.
Thank you. And as I said, you're very welcome now to stay for networking and any informal discussions you'd like. Thank you.